You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is August 15th, 2024. It's 7:38 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And what I wanted to talk about was the feeling of having arrived at the end of your goal, but it not meaning much to you when you get there. And really what this is a conversation around secondary and primary exploration, but it is also a conversation about how much pressure to achieve you received when you were a child and what that pressure was really about. In the beginning of exploration, there's an encouragement that we require to really develop the capacity, which is when it really begins. You might say that the origin of it is at around 18 months old, although there's lots of things that happen before that. But at about that age, you develop the capacity to recognize that you actually have an agenda that is independent of your caregiver's agenda, and that there are things that you like to pursue and investigate that's different from theirs. And in a collaborative relationship with a caregiver, you learn to make accommodations for your caregiver's agenda, and they make accommodations for you. An example of that might be you say that you're hungry, and then your caregiver says, let me make you something. And you recognize that the gesture of them making something for you will take certain steps in order to, say, make a sandwich. And you'll recognize that they've understood what your request was, and now you have to wait for them to be able to make the sandwich and give it to you before you can eat it. Is that making sense? But this is also true of the kind of exploration that you might like to do. So at about a year old, you get enough strength in your legs to stand up on twos, but you don't really have much of a sense of balance. There's a period of crawling, of course, where you can get around pretty quickly. Lucy is barking. I'm going to put her outside. Lucy, you can't. The Lucy's having trouble collaborating with my agenda to give this talk. So close the door.
Yeah, we don't hear her at all, actually.
You don't?
Nope.
All right. I'll let her back in. The sometimes Lucy decides that there's a mouse. She proceeds to track it, which is the current phase we're in. The way that a child expresses the things that matter to them to their caregiver, which is a process of learning to explore. The child goes out and finds something, they gather it, and they bring it back to the caregiver, and they show it to the caregiver with an expression of their interest in it. And then, depending on how the caregiver reacts to that, are they engaged? Are they delighted that the child has done this? Are they curious about what the child has brought? Are they interested in the child's explanation about what it was that was appealing about the thing that they found? Do they then give it back to the child and then encourage the child to go off and find something else. This is the process of that. Or does something else happen? And in kids who are neglected, the parents are not interested really in what the child discovers, or they don't want the child to explore in the way that the child explores, and they're directive of what the child should be paying attention to. And sometimes there can be a shaming aspect to that. The things that the child expresses. Hold on. Okay. The other day, Lucy ran full speed into the screen door and knocked it off of its wheels, and actually probably hurt herself in doing it, and was very surprised that it was there at all. And now she's very apprehensive about coming in and out of doors, and you almost have to take her through them because she can't figure it out yet. So part of this process of exploration is being encouraged to go and find something out, finding it out, and then coming back and expressing what you find out to the caregiver. In the beginning, obviously, it's the caregiver. In secure systems, that the interest of the child is really celebrated with a sense of delight, and in insecure and disorganized attachment outcomes, that isn't what happens. Often with dismissing people, you'll notice that the primary exploration is hidden. They don't really express it to anyone because there's some aspect of it being devalued in the family system. And in order to preserve it, they keep it private. So that when they form relationships with other people, that primary aspect of the exploration is not expressed in the relationship. And there isn't been a process of normalizing the pursuit of those particular ideas, and so they can be associated with an anticipation of rejection or an anticipation of shame if they are expressed. In people who grow up to be preoccupied, the exploration is inhibited quite a bit. So whereas people who grow up to be dismissing can explore and do explore, people who are preoccupied tend to be quite inhibited around this. And that comes in two directions. One is that the caregiver requires the proximity of the child. And so each time that the child intends to make a foray to discover something, the caregiver interferes. It's often coached in language of protection. It's too dangerous to do that. You have to stay close. I don't, that doesn't seem like a good thing. Another aspect is that the child recognizes that the parent is dependent on them for emotional regulation. And if the child separates from the caregiver and they return, the caregiver can be in a state of emotional dysregulation that is more than the child can manage. And so the child becomes inhibited from separating from the caregiver so that they don't come back to an adult who's so dysregulated that it's frightening. Disorganized people, often the pattern of exploration and the discovery of that is the path through which they're exploited or harmed. And so that exploration piece becomes quite fraught. And then also because the disorganized person can't really regulate themselves reliably so that they can consistently pursue something, when they get to be adults, that dysregulation causes them to fall out of more complex explorations than just happen individually. Christian.
George, in your description of the preoccupied, like limiting exploration, do you think it's there's like a necessary involving component in the parent's mind state in that kind of limiting the exploration? Because I could imagine a way in which parents might kind of limit exploration if they really did, like if there actually was some kind of danger, um, where that might still have a sort of secure flavor to it. Or maybe they just like, maybe there's an extra step of it becomes involving, or do you think that, sorry if it's not like a super clear question, but
Well, I think that it is the duty of the caregiver to keep the child safe. And they should be, fierce in keeping the child safe. And often children who have parents who are not attentive find themselves in situations that they shouldn't because of that. And there is no one to protect them. But that is different than a child who is safe and wants to go explore and is inhibited from doing that. So an example of that might be that when the child wants to be picked up, you pick them up. And when the child wants to be put down, you put them down. And an example of where that would be inhibited is the child wants to be picked up, and so you pick them up. But when they want to be put down, because you're more comfortable having them close to you, don't put them down. And when they resist that, you overwhelm them physically with your strength and prevent them from resuming their exploration. And you'll notice when that happens, the child will put up an effort, but when they're clearly overwhelmed, they give up. And that's really what that process is. They give up doing it because they're not permitted to. And if that happens over and over again, and in preoccupied households in a way that's unpredictable for the child just doesn't do it after a while.
okay, that makes sense.
Because they don't develop that rudimentary capacity to explore, the older they get, the harder it is to begin that journey. Oftentimes, when you have caregivers that put a lot of pressure to achieve on, they're putting pressure to achieve on the things that they think matter. And there often isn't a looping in of the child as to what matters to the child, so that the child is actually engaged in pursuing something that has primary meaning to them. They're engaged in something that has secondary meanings, is the gathering of time, energy, and resources, which are important, right? If you're a child who's entirely dependent on your caregivers providing for you, and they are directing you towards something, you don't really have much of a choice about whether or not you do it. They are in control of that. And depending on how they leverage the control, sometimes it's just you have to do this. It's a requirement, and there's a level of expectation in the performance, or they support something and don't support something else. So you, in the child position, can choose to attempt to do it on your own, but not really be able to succeed at doing it, or you can go with what they're willing to support, and so you end up in the direction that they want. And this is really the conundrum, that when you learn to pursue secondary exploration because you get the support for that, but you don't get support for primary exploration, you get good at secondary exploration. But secondary exploration, that gathering of time, energy, and resources, doesn't really produce a sense of meaning in being alive. It doesn't really address that whole piece. And so you can get good at gathering, you can get good at material resources, you can get good at kind of relationships that are transactional, trauma bonded. But one of the things that carries secure functioning relationships is the sharing of primary exploration, the synergy that comes from those expressions. You go out and find something out about the world, and you bring it back to the relationship and the expression of it. If the primary explorations are aligned enough, they get a benefit not only in supporting you, but also from what you find out, which supports them in their exploration and their discovery. And then when they come back and they express it to you, you're aligned enough. You get the benefit both of supporting them, but also what they find out is useful to you as you move through life. So I like to call that a traveling companion. You go through life together, pursuing the things that really mean something to you and have the support that you need actually to take risks. It's one thing to take risks for time, energy, and resources, and another thing to take risks for primary meaning. This is a meditation community, and so really one of the things that we might consider talking about is the risk-taking in practice to discover the spiritual things that provide meaning in life, to go for the consistent practice over time that leads to these insights into the nature of the human condition, and to free us up from being trapped in what in the West is quite common, a fearfulness about really engaging in life, understanding that it's a short window and that death is at one end of it, and reliably at one end of it. In fact, so reliable is it that nobody escapes it. When you get caught up in the secondary exploration and you don't address either side of that equation, you don't address the fear that arises when you really move into life and really understand the nature of it and the nature of connection, the nature of intimate expression, and the freedom to be authentically yourself, you withdraw from that engagement of life. And mainly the way that we think about that is that we think that we can do it later. But the only way that we can think that we can do it later is if we deny the reality of death, because there is no later if you include that. And so that piece where you really go into the nature of this, the sense of self. In spiritual practice, of course, there's these early insights, the nature of self and no self in the Theravada view. Mudit?
So the pursuit of primary exploration, you're saying that someone does not pursue it because there's initial fear involved when pursuing primary explorations. Otherwise, it's a dead giveaway. Like, I like something, why am I not doing it? Like,
Well, in each gesture toward the discovery of meaning, there is a lot of potential outcomes. There is the fearfulness of even doing it, and then the fearfulness of whether you can manage it or not, the fearfulness of what you'll find out, fearfulness of how it might change the understanding of your life and how it's been operating. All of those things, which is why you need support. All of those things are dysregulating emotionally, and if you don't have the capacity within yourself to regulate it, and you don't have people around you to regulate that, the distress of that is enough to get you to curtail the level of risk that you're willing to take. Is that making sense?
this is very important. So I didn't realize that the primary exploration comes with this aspect of fear, a baseline emotion that needs to be supported by somebody else.
Well, you want to be brilliant, really brilliant at regulating yourself, and you want to have a wide range of skills in regulating yourself. But you also need to accept that if you're going to take big risks, it's ordinary to find yourself in a situation where you can't regulate yourself. It's beyond your capacity, even as brilliant as you are at doing it. And that's when you have to have the social network around you that will catch you, and they need to be reliable, so that you don't worry about it in the moment when you need to take the risk to find meaning. If you're worried about whether or not you can manage the outcome of it, it inhibits the level of risk you're willing to take. Does that make
Is there an
sense?
example we can give on the risk aspect? Is it because of money? Like because somebody will leave his job and do something that he likes and he's
Well, there's
afraid?
that. Trying to think of something. I'm thinking of my earlier meditation life. Well, let's say theoretically, at the moment that you could take stream entry, if you weren't willing to just fall into it, it's interesting. Shinzen used to say that, I said to Shinzen that stream entry was like standing at the edge of the pool and then just falling in without resisting it. And he said, it's more like you stand there and the water in the pool comes out and surrounds you and you don't resist it. But in the moment that you see that happening, can you just open into it and not resist it at all? Or does the fearfulness creep in? And then the fearfulness shut down the whole process of it. Is that making sense? Too abstract? Earlier along the path, when you move from an AP event, that arising and passing event, where you really see the dissolution of the entire inside of the sensing experiences, and then you move into dissolution, which is the dissolving of the sense barrier between inside and out, and it's just a lot of energy. Often the thing that shuts that down is fear. You become really frightened by not being able to locate any sense of the physical body. And it completely shuts down the experience of that. Another aspect of where the fearfulness might come in is in the dissolution of the somaticide centers, when you have these big eruptions of energy releases, really startlingly intense releases of energy. You can either allow it and just go with that huge expansion of energy, or you become frightened by the intensity of energy and it shuts down the whole process. Is that making more sense?
Mm-hmm. So in that case, the fear, it does arise, it shuts you down, but you have somebody to talk with, like your teacher or whatever.
Right.
You would go back and share what happened, and he
And
or
then,
she.
and then the next time you notice that it's about to happen, you're not fearful because you feel a sense of support.
I see.
Or you have the experience of it being fearful and shutting down, and then recognizing that it was manageable with the support that you have. And so the next time it happens, there isn't that automatic response of fear. But let's take something more mundane. An authentic expression arises in the mind, and right after that, a spike of abandonment terror arises, that if you were to express yourself authentically, clearly through the aspect of right speech, But if you were to express yourself authentically, you risk being abandoned by the person that you're in relationship to. Do you continue with the authentic expression, or do you moderate it or spin it with something that's inauthentic because you can't make the risk of the authentic expression? And then there's also the relationship with yourself. We get very attached to our identity. Our identity is often firmly involved in our secondary exploration, and we tend to favor the secondary exploration because it supports our sense of who we wish the world to respond to us, who we wish people to see us as. And then the primary exploration arises, and somehow in the constellation of our conditioning, it's not valuable enough. So we don't really pursue it because it contradicts the sense of self that we've developed. This is very if we talk about it in a Western psychological frame, Masterson said that we develop the false self, so that when we're involved in family systems where there isn't an interest in who we are authentically, and there isn't an interest in what skills we actually have and what interests we actually have, and it's mainly focused on secondary exploration, we develop a false self to accommodate all of that. And the thing is that false self gets highly developed because we're developing the skills that are necessary to meet all of those qualifications. And the primary self, the authentic self, the real self, doesn't get all that attention, doesn't get all of those resources, doesn't get all of that training. And so you have a kind of goofy, immature, undeveloped sense of authenticity that doesn't come with the polish of the false self. Does that make any sense? And so to take the risks in that sort of unpolished way that often is necessary when you begin to really move toward the pursuit of primary meaning, it feels awkward, it's clumsy, you don't feel good at it. Christian?
I might give like for any number of artists, like there's some people that have performance anxiety and maybe they are actors or musicians and they end up not pursuing their craft because it's too stressful for them to be on stage, or even like writers or artists that maybe they've gotten to a certain point where they're ready to publish or they're ready to have like a gallery show or something, but they might do things to self-sabotage because of the fear of being seen and judged for their like sort of authentic artistic expression is too scary, right? And so like that would be maybe kind of an example that makes sense to me at least.
So I would call that the fear of success, but and I'll talk about that in a second. But another thing that happens to artists in particular is that they find a way of expression that becomes popular. And they find a way of expression that's culturally valued. And each time they move into a different exploration, it's not greeted in the same way. And so they just begin to limit the expression into the repetition of making the same expression over and over again. And so we would call that a branded artist that consistently produces the same kind of work, which is in the market economy of art very valuable, because in order for an artist's work to be liquid in terms of easy to buy and sell, there has to be hundreds of pieces or thousands of pieces, which means they have to make so many of them. Whereas on the experimental side of art, where you're making these inquiries into things that actually are matter to you, the directions keep changing, and the amount of work that's made in each direction is limited, so it doesn't lend itself well to these international markets. And at the extreme end of the branded artist, of course, is the artist themselves just sitting in the museum, which you see more and more of.
George, would you call that
Makes
more
me
of
laugh.
would you call that more of the sort of avoidant flavor? Um,
Um, I I guess I could see it as that. You know, it's hard to know, but it is a sensitivity to. I really liken it, and the way that I divide it in my mind is to think of that as spectacle, and art as a different kind of exploration, really. And we're very aligned to spectacle in our culture.
So secure people also feels the fear of publishing or whatever that is, but he has the ways to self-regulate and the people
Well,
to
it's
talk.
in the quality of the work. Do you make work that's very representative of the authentic interest that you have and the authentic meaning that you find, and in the range of reaction to the world that we live in? Or are you more oriented around the in the West, the very narrow range of what's permissible to discuss? So if you find that you keep confining your expression to that very narrow range, it tends to have more access to the culture than if you don't accept those limitations. And people's work who do that are simply not included in the main cultural discussion, because they don't confine themselves to what's permissible to discuss. If that makes sense.
And so do you find the people who have transitioned to secure attachment move more towards art-based or creative-based meaning?
I don't think that that's true. I think that in our culture, art is sort of at the peak of what is supposed to be creative. But I think that the axis of the creative self, the activation of the creative self, and the pursuit of things that are meaningful is a huge range. And that I mainly talk about spiritual exploration, spiritual discovery as creative, because of the type of community that this is. But I think that the range is really unlimited in terms of what you can engage in. But what the discovery there is that it really is, the activity itself is meaningful. You derive beyond a pleasure, an engagement that is enriching in your understanding of the nature of the life that you have. This one short, precious, as Mary Oliver would say, this one wild and precious life. What are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? That you derive a sense of fulfillment in having been alive. Now, obviously, in our culture, immortality is the thing. So as an artist, you make an iconic work that's put into a museum that lasts for generations. As a business person, you put your name on 87 buildings so that you're remembered for at least 100 years or 50 years. How long does a building last? You attempt to affect the body politic in a way that then you can be remembered. You know, we in the West, we mainly have a history of people who went to war and won. It's a very narrow range of what is important. I'm going to imagine that there's a whole possibility of things that have happened that have been important that aren't valued in these kinds of cultural narratives that we have. So I don't think that you should limit yourself to the pursuit of something that has cultural value in it if it isn't meaningful. It falls then just into the secondary exploration, which is the gathering of time, energy, and resources. To have a deep spiritual practice, for instance, is not highly valued in our culture, and to put the time, energy, and resources into that is often baffling to people that don't have an activation of their creative self in the direction of making these kinds of discoveries. On the other hand, I think they're fantastic things to know, and have spent, what is it, 50 years about now in the pursuit of them, maybe a little longer. That making sense? Udit?
I just want to say thank you for saying this. Meditation is also something, a big part of me, and all this time I've been thinking of how it's not, I think not culturally, but I think my mind is the culture, that culturally that it's not enough for me to do. And even though I do it every day, but it's not something like, oh, I find it deeply meaningful. Yes, but there's this expectations of the secondary and primary being mixed in the same buckets. It's hard to sometimes.
Yeah. Well, most of us don't end up in a situation where our means of providing for ourselves and the things that are meaningful are remunerative and provide that. Most of us are going to be in a dance of flowing resources into secondary exploration and flowing resources into primary, or gathering the resources in secondary and flowing them into our primary exploration. We aren't a culture that really considers primary exploration as so important. We're really mainly focused on secondary exploration.
Is there any other culture in the world which does?
Well,
It's all the same.
well, it really is heading that way, since it's become a world culture rather than more individual culture.
Right.
I would think that part of the dilemma that we're in now is this the adjectives for this, the gross, insane, unconscionable inequality that we're facing means that it's so difficult just to manage the secondary side of exploration, just to gather the resources to survive, that there isn't really much bandwidth beyond that in order to develop the capacity for primary exploration.
So the answer is no, there isn't any culture.
Well, some cultures value education. If you get higher up into the world in terms of the distribution of resources, where there isn't a need for work, isn't a need to provide that it comes in a life where you've already made enough of that so that you don't have to attend to that. That would open a window of exploration for people. And so in those places, I think there often is a value to it. Certainly in academic circles, there is some range of pursuing things that have meaning, but you also see the academic world filled with people who have entered into places of study because of the pressure to achieve. So in the broader culture, it's oriented toward this very narrow range of things that are valuable. And you really need to go only for those. So that if your what's meaningful to you falls outside of that narrow spectrum, it's not valued. We have a term for it, which is called hobby. Your hobby. So it's a. I've always heard it as pejorative. Have you ever heard it as not pejorative?
You changed that in my mind. That's amazing.
Or the weekend. I'll give you an example. When I moved to New York in 1975, there was a big recession that was happening, and inflation was at about 15% a year, which was pretty staggering. And New York City, Manhattan, we used to say New York, but we only meant Manhattan. The outer boroughs were too far away. Below 14th Street, there was a 40% occupancy of the buildings. So most of the upper floors of the buildings were empty, and they were very inexpensive in comparison. I rented a loft on 11th and Broadway in Manhattan, which was renting for 25 cents a foot. And that meant that 1,400 square feet of loft space was $175 a month. We could all work 2 days a week in that environment and pay our bills, and that left 5 days a week to actually pursue things that were meaningful. And so you have in New York during that time this incredible burst of creative activity that really doesn't happen now because of the cost of things and how much time has to be dedicated to the gathering of resources. And that changed. The fall of Iraq was of Iran was really the beginning of that, and the beginning of that real shift out of a more equal tax system, the gutting of the protections on the banks that were put in after the Depression, so that speculation engine that produced so much consolidating of the money happened then. And then it wasn't that you could work 2 days a week and afford the place that you were living. It's that you had to work 7 days a week, and still it was difficult to manage. And as a result of that whole moment of creativity just came to an end because nobody could do it anymore. So that's really part of this equation too. How can you put yourself in a position where you have the resources that are necessary then to be able to pursue the things that you want to be able to get good at, to discover, to know. Okay, why don't we do some practice? All right, let go of the meditation.
Sorry, can I take 60 seconds for you to repeat the self thing? Yes, it is true that things are appearing and disappearing. And there's...
If you back the self off so that the self you're instructing the self to do nothing, not to direct anything, not to control anything, not to cause anything. What you begin to notice is that whole activity of attention being drawn to different sense objects happens independent of the sense of self. Actually, the sense of self is not in charge of that. It's just a sensing byproduct, and that the unconscious, the deeply unconscious conditioned body-mind activity is what's causing it.
But it feels like the sense of self is thinking. Once it's identified, the sense of self is thinking about it. It's me who's thinking because it's related with my past.
And are you controlling it? Are you controlling the thought that you have?
Not the initial, but the once I've caught it, then I am. It feels like I am.
Okay. So to practice more, and each time you notice that the self is engaging something, back it off. Don't give it permission to do that.
Yes, that's the practice. Yes,
Yeah.
but I don't. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it's even the progression of the thought. The self is not creating it. Yes.
The self is experiencing it, but it's a witness. It's not a doer, a causer, a controller, a creator. It's a witness.
That you think you are. But yes.
Yeah. It's the audience. It's not the performer on the stage.
Even when it's identified.
Yeah.
Even after. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's just watching. It's really just there to stop you from doing something dumb. Too bad it doesn't work better.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So we have Christian.
I was noticing today kind of like a sense of irritation no matter where I was. And I guess I wasn't always noting it. Because there was a lot of time spent in feel space, whether that was more in like the body, but then I realized that the kind of irritation was accompanying me when I noted something in hear space or in see space as well. So then that kind of brought my attention to
So
like
what level of dukkha was it?
uh it was manageable. It was
Well, dukkha, 3 levels. One is old age, sickness, and death. So the body is painful. The body isn't cooperating, or you're scattered and not concentrated. That's the first level.
it was the nothing is how I want it to be.
Right. The third level, the constant, unbroken irritation that nothing is the way that you want it. If you were in charge of anything, which is the other part of that.
Right.
Yep.
Sorry. So the intention when we say to search for the self, at least in Dan's teachings, we talk about you search for the self. So this searching is also not my.
The answer is that there is no self that you can find that's constant, ongoing, locatable, positionable,
Right.
permanent.
But it's there, but it's not solid.
It is, when you really investigate it, it arises based on the conditions of the present moment. And every time the conditions of the present moment change, the constellation of the sense of self changes with it.
And where do you put see here, the self, and see here, feel? Because I'm not sure which one I should feel.
The constellation of self in that frame is going to be focus in plus feel out. So internal visual thinking, internal auditory thinking, emotion in the body, and the felt sense of the body create the sense of self.
Oh, I know it's just one. Okay.
That what you meant?
Yeah, but you experience it, but you can just say, feel. I know the sense of self is here right now.
Right.
Yes.
And you can really break it into that auditory and visual thinking, and the emotional and physical sense of the body come together and create the self experience.
Fascinating.
Because I mean, if you break it into feel, focus in, focus out, it doesn't really, without that physical quality of the body, doesn't really produce a strong sense of self.
Oh, for me, emotion feels enough to
It
create.
does.
But yeah, I don't know.
But the solid sense of self, I think, really requires that.
Uh, Yes.
that body piece. Good. We have a level 2 coming up in September. Otherwise, all of the classes have already begun for the remainder of the year. We have a couple of half-day workshops. I'm starting to do these workshops on exploration, which is the topic of tonight, but we'll go into it in a deeper way and then begin to explore a meditation path toward it. I'm going to do the first one, I think is I don't know what it is, but it's coming up. Let me look. It's in September on the 21st. And then in October, the second one is on the 26th. And I'm going to actually talk about my own exploration in photography, which I find one of the central sources of meaning for me, and how that developed. As an artistic expression versus just an expression of meditation. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate your practice. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope that if you have the capacity, you can make a donation. There's a link on the website to do that. I hope to see you soon on the path. Thank you. Bye.